Okay, it looks like it's time for us to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Northwest ATTC webinar. I'm Jennifer Verbeck, and I'm your host for today. We're excited to have Paul Hunziker presenting for us on family programming for substance use disorder, what works. Go ahead and skip to the next slide, please. If you have any questions for our presenter, please type them into the chat box at any time, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation today. Next slide. You'll also be getting an email at the end of today's webinar. It has a link to a survey in it, so please take that survey. It makes us, it helps us make sure that we're bringing you the content you're most interested in. And that email will also have a link to download the slides from today and a link to our website where you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar, and that should be available later this afternoon. Next slide. We'll also be sending everyone who attends this live webinar a certificate of attendance, and it takes us about a week to get those out. You don't need to do anything to get the certificate unless you're watching this in a group. In that case, please have someone in the group email us within a business day with the names and email addresses for everyone who wants a certificate. And our email is up there on the slide. It's northwest@attcnetwork.org. Next slide. And so we have Paul with us today. I'm pleased to introduce him. He's been working with the Northwest ATTC since 2015. So we've known him for quite some time. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist, substance use disorder professional, and an American Association of Marriage and Family Therapist approved supervisor. Paul also has a private practice in Tacoma where he works with supervisees and clients. And I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you, Paul, and you can finish introducing yourself. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. All right, so definitely adding on to some of that introduction. Worked with families for the better part of 20 years in different settings. I was actually a wilderness therapist for some time, working in a program that had a strong family component. And then through the years, I've worked in various programs, either that had strong family components or helped them build family components. And that ultimately culminated in 2014, I founded an agency that was entirely family-centered for substance use disorder and ran that for several years. And so gives you some idea of some of the background here. So let's go in. So family programming, we all know, or most of us know, that it's a really important thing, though it can be an elusive ideal that we aim for. I had a psychologist one time talking to me about family therapists, and he came up to me and was like, you know, Paul, you family therapists, you find the biggest puddle of mud and you dive into the middle of it. And I found that to be a really great metaphor for it, because family work is messy. And it's frequently, sometimes we may shy away from it because it can be messy. Yet at the same time, you can't clean it up unless you get rid of work with the mud. And so talking about the importance of it. And so let's kind of dive in here. I want to start us out here with land recognition. And I'll read the slide off here. So in applying a lens of cultural humility to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the NWATTC offers this land acknowledgement today to today's event. And so I'll do the land acknowledgement for me where I stand on the traditional lands of the Puyallup tribe, as well as the Coast Salish. Our work here intends to reach the addiction workforce of the Health and Human Services Region 10. So this is us as the ATTC. Region 10 includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, as well as Washington. And noting that this area rests on traditional territories of many indigenous nations, including tribal groups with whom the United States signed treaties prior to granting statehood. Please join us in this effort to support and affirm tribal sovereignty and displaying respect and gratitude for our indigenous neighbors. So hopefully either Jennifer or Mandy, someone will be able to send a link. There's a land recognition map. If you haven't seen it before, if folks could, it would be fantastic if you could go to that land recognition map when that link comes through and go through and find on that map where you're located Only takes a few moments. It's an interactive map. So you might need to move your space around. I know if you're in Alaska, you might need to move the map down a little bit just to get there. But if you could find the name of the peoples, the traditional peoples of the lands that you currently are on, and type that into chat, that would be fantastic. It would really be great if we could all participate in this and just acknowledge the lands we're on. I don't have time to read through all of this, so if you can do this in the background, that would be great. Again, I do appreciate if you participate in this. All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit here while folks are maybe doing that in the background. So for time's sake, kind of diving in right into the material. So with family programming, we want to look first and start with what the research says. Just looking at, well, why do it if it's not effective? So when we look at the research over decades, what really comes out, research doesn't say a whole lot. This has been a woefully understudied area. And so there are numerous reasons for this. So it is a challenging area to study, largely because there can be so many different ways to define success. So are we looking at engagement? In other words, are families coming in? And actually, even in saying that, is that actually the definition? Because what is engagement? Is it them coming to one session? Is it them coming to a certain number of sessions? Or is it them staying involved in during the whole process? That is one facet of family research that, and you can see where it becomes challenging trying to pinpoint exactly what you're measuring. So we are working through this, and there are several evidence-based practices that are developing a research base for family programming. So the good news is that this is changing, but we still are plagued by some of these difficulties. The studies that we have, they're really stuck with small sample sizes because there aren't as many family-based programs, and there was a decline for a number of years in family programs, largely due to the fact that reimbursement became challenging. And so with fewer programs, there isn't as much of a pool to pull from. Also, as with many aspects of research, we haven't looked at a diverse enough population. We actually, when we look at the research lens, it doesn't match the actual clinical lens. And the part of that is the fact that we're not actually looking at a diverse enough population in the research itself to be able to draw the conclusions that that make sense for the population that we work for. Luckily, as I mentioned, this is changing. So there is a lot more research, and there's a resurgence of family therapy, especially within the last like 5 or so years, that is really coming in. So looking at what we do have, we generally find that including families in treatment has favorable outcomes generally. What we see outcome-wise that seems to shine through is that when progress is made in treatment, if there's a family component, that progress is more likely to last longer. And so we know that by adding families in, we can enhance the gains that we make. Also, specifically looking at conflict, there's a lot of family programming focuses on communication. And so with time, it does show that conflict tends to be affected in a positive direction. So there's a reduction. It's also important to note that the vast majority of the research, as well as the vast majority of the programs in family, are focused on adolescents. This is generally for the fact that adolescents are more often still within their family system when they're in treatment. The thing that's there, and SAMHSA did a study or a survey in 2018, and they found that 60% of the programs actually had couples counseling. So this is a promising aspect here, is recognizing that we're growing beyond just the adolescent focus. In fact, a group that we really need to pay attention to is adults of children of older adults who have substance use disorder. This is a group that really needs support for the fact that it's a growing population. It's not an area that we tend to focus on a lot, and they have some very specific needs. And so hopefully there'll be more and more research that comes through with this as we go forward. So when we think of family programming, and here I'm going to say family programming, sometimes you'll see family therapy kind of slotted in. I'm using the term family programming very, very intentionally here, though. The reason is that, yes, family therapy usually needs folks that have a master's degree or higher, maybe some specific training in family therapy specifically. And I want to note that in order to have a good family program, you don't have to have those folks necessarily on your staff. It's great if you do, they can definitely enhance a program, but they're not absolutely needed. You can have a fantastic family-centered program with just addictions counselors on staff. And so let's walk through here because there's a spectrum of programs here. So first, on the far side of the spectrum, we have individually focused treatment programs. So these are programs and for many reasons they do this, that they will focus on the individual, and they don't really involve family unless there's a need for information. In fact, it's pretty rare that family is involved. Then you come to the middle of the road here, the middle of the spectrum. And here, family program is available. It's really only considered an add-on service though, or adjunct. So adjunct would be that it's something meant to that's on the side that's meant to support the main therapy, which is the individual therapy. Probably familiar with these. These are very common programs. And we're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages of this kind of setup here. And then on the far right, you have fully, truly family-centered programming. And so what sets these groups apart is the fact that every aspect of treatment has a family focus. In fact, family might actually be considered the center or primary as the treatment approach. So I want to look at this side of the spectrum extensively because you're all going to need to kind of pick where you want to go with this. Well, to figure out where you are and where you want to go. But I want to give you the kind of the farthest side of it and then see where you want to fit. So in a family-centered program, even before treatment starts, there's a family center. Something that we'll note in these programs is they will talk to family. They emphasize the importance of family. They're encouraging family contact right off the bat. And something that also stands out is they have a way to, if a family member calls in, they have a way to work with them, even if the patient won't necessarily come in. So that's something that really stands apart because it really sends that message. You are important. We need you here. You are a major asset to this. So then you get to the assessment. And a family-centered program is going to have some kind of family-centered assessment incorporated into the work. And so that immediately from pre-treatment all the way to assessment, and then even into possibly ASAM, if you're using ASAM, treatment planning or placement. There might be a discussion around with family of what makes sense for the family. And then you get to treatment interventions. This is where you might think of traditionally family therapy coming in, but it could be any number of things like a multiple family group or multifamily group, behavioral couples counseling, or any family-centered intervention. And then lastly, moving all the way through discharge, making sure that the family is involved in that process to recognize that this is kind of being handed off to them as they move on to community supports and their own supports. So now taking each of those components apart, let's first look at engaging. So this is them coming in the door. Let's see, you got that welcome mat there. Maybe even before they come in the door. Frequently we don't necessarily even have them come through the door at this point during the pandemic. It may just be on a phone call, maybe on a Zoom call or like this or something else. So there is research into this, into engaging. And there are some, in a meta-analysis of this research, these are the points that come out that are important to things that help families feel comfortable coming in and things that tend to keep them more connected to the service. Parent partners, huge. So peer support, specifically trained in this, in being parent partners, is incredibly valuable. Also, if you have access to youth partners, these are definitely things that definitely keep the family connected. Being flexible in how you provide the service, if they can happen outside the office, say home visits, if that's possible, or phone, or I mean, now we have Zoom. Of course, that requires people have the technology, but having some flexibility there and skills and how to use those and how to say use Zoom in a way that's effective, that they're going to feel more welcome in coming in. Session reminders, whether that's text, email, or phone, or somehow reaching out to them just to remind them that there's a meeting or a session coming up. And then ultimately making sure that the intake staff, the folks on the phone or whatever the first contact point is, have the training they need to feel confident in being able to connect with family members and make sure that they feel welcome. Because it is really easy for them to not feel welcome. There's a lot of things that could happen. In fact, the family may be kind of assuming that they're not welcome. And so there's already this hurdle you have to overcome because of training from prior experiences with treatment or whatever it is that led them to that belief. And then, of course, making sure your clinical staff are trained. Now, this is where motivational interviewing can shine, is working with your staff to make sure that they've got MI skills to help, say, work with a patient who might be reluctant about bringing family in, and using their MI skills to have them kind of examine that and increase the likelihood that they will bring family in. Also using motivational interviewing skills with reluctant family members to talk with them through their ambivalence about coming in. So MI is one way of doing this. There are others, though, as well. So in looking at engagement, it is really important for us to make sure to mention community reinforcement and family training, or CRAFT. So if you're not familiar with CRAFT, it's a very structured approach. It's really designed, and it's structured in the sense that you have about 6 sessions, and it actually is specifically with the loved ones. The patient or client may or may not be there. So it is a way, in some ways, to do kind of pre-treatment. And really the focus of it is to engage family or loved ones in figuring out how to increase the chances that the person who's using substances will become more open to the idea of possibly seeking treatment. And so right here, it's an evidence-based practice in engagement, essentially. Kind of looking at this further, we use significant others and use their influence to help work with the loved one to kind of bring them in. And then also the last point on here, looking at helping significant others find the middle ground between control and detachment. Because frequently they're in a desperate place where they've gotten down to this point where they feel like they either need to try to control the person and stop them from using, or they've completely given up and have backed away. And so with CRAFT, it's working with them to kind of figure out that balance. CRAFT is a phenomenal program. If you can get trained in it, great. It is highly valuable. It can be a great asset and a great addition to your program, is either pre-treatment or also can be incorporated into treatment as well. That being said, it can be quite involved in getting the training. What I want you to leave today with is some ideas of maybe how you can incorporate this way of thinking into the way that you practice. So a less structured approach that incorporates a lot of the ideas around CRAFT. Well, first it involves, say, someone calls in and says that they have a loved one that they're concerned about, that they think has a substance use problem. So being able to offer them something that things that could be provided are psychoeducation. So psychoeducation on how substance use works, also kind of how addiction works and how it affects family members. Could be ways that some instruction on things they can do that can help, or maybe ways they can shift their thinking or approach that might be more helpful. There's a number of things you could do through psychoeducation, whether bringing them in or on the phone or however you want to set it up. And then, of course, providing them with referrals and resources. And I've given there's a handout section here. There's some resources there. There's like Allies to Recovery, which is actually a craft-oriented program. Unfortunately, it's a paid subscription, but that is one approach. If you can find other avenues like Smart Recovery or Al-Anon can also be a referral as well. Al-Anon's important to recognize that Al-Anon is really great at teaching people how to take care of themselves when they live with someone with addiction. Where it falls short is in helping the person who's addicted get help. Craft is really designed to do both. Al-Anon is really good at helping the person who's living with someone with addiction take care of themselves. Both are very important, and Al-Anon is a very good referral, just recognizing that is really what they focus on. So being able to provide that information, and in doing this, make sure to not blame or shame. And so in doing that, some ways that jump out are maybe avoiding labels. I know sometimes for families, we can fall back to this label of codependence that can have a blaming and shaming quality to it. And so we would potentially want to steer away from that, or sometimes words like enabling can also have a blaming or shaming quality. And so instead of enabling, maybe going in and saying things that encourage ongoing use, or things that might facilitate ongoing use, as opposed to enabling, and working with that. Now, also making sure to focus on their concern. You really need to pay attention to them, where they're at, what they feel is the most important thing in the moment, because that really elevates them, brings them in, makes them feel heard and seen, which is so important. Expressing hope. Now, one of the pieces with expressing hope is sometimes I caught myself in this of saying, well, yeah, it's going to be important for someone to hit bottom because they need to motivate themselves to come into treatment. Unfortunately, I want to reframe that. Now, instead, what I say now is, let's talk. Right now, they're not in a place to come in. That doesn't mean that that's not going to change. They will, at some point, be open to coming in. See how that shifts. It still gives them roughly the same message, but it expresses more hope. And then also, there are some real things that you can do right now that will help, not only them, but yourself. Again, expressing hope. And then lastly, offering affirmations here. And so connecting what they're currently doing or what they're thinking about doing with their values and goals. And so examples right here would be that automatically come up of, you've called in today. This shows that you care so much about your family member and you really want things to be different. It's right there as an affirmation, talks about what's important to them. Also really further entices them to continue to engage and either work with you or connect to the services that you're offering them. So this is a less structured approach that you wouldn't need craft training to apply. You could apply on your own pretty quickly. If you want more information on this, this also is in the tip 39 from SAMHSA as well. So now we just looked at engagement. We talked about craft. Now we're imagining the person has come in and we're getting ready to do an assessment. So here, we've got to pick one of three ways to do this. So most of us are probably doing individually focused assessments. It's pretty much the standard. Reasons were to make sure to be able to get a clear diagnosis and ASAM placement. What you can also do, though, is you can take an individual assessment and then combine a family-centered assessment, or have an aspect of the assessment be family-centered. So this is kind of the middle of the ground, or middle of the road. and you get kind of best of both worlds. The last one on here is family-centered assessment. It can be wonderful. What's great about a family-centered assessment is it keeps following through with that piece that the family is at the core of the work that you're doing. It keeps reminding them that they're an important asset, that their opinion and their view is going to be valued. It really keeps them connected. It is possible to do a family-centered assessment and get the information that you need for the individual, like diagnosis and ASAM placement. Though you're going to want to make sure that folks kind of know how to do that and have the training for that. So some family-centered assessment applications or tools. One is genograms. So genograms have been around for some time. They're essentially a family tree, though they incorporate a lot more information than a standard family tree. What they really do is they help you and the family kind of see in a visual way how they're mapped out, which can have a really significant impact on all of those involved. Because a lot of times things will jump out, patterns will jump out that were never apparent before until it was laid out this way. I've been in programs that have used Genogram as the entire assessment. And take some skill with that, but we were able to have a lot of really great effect with that, and we were still able to meet our requirements for reimbursement and other aspects. What I see more often is that Genogram is a component of the assessment. Totally fair as well, and that can work great. What's nice with Genograms, though, is to remember that they're not necessarily just an assessment tool, they're an ongoing intervention tool. And so taking the Genogram and making sure that it stays with you through the process so that the family can keep adding information in, because you could either give assignments or maybe they're just going to automatically on their own gather more information from the family about why things are the way that they are or what the relationships were like, and you plug that in. You can also track the changes in their relationships through Genograms. So Genograms is a really great tool, and it's even better if you extend it into the treatment process. I've included some stuff, an example of some Genogram tools in your in the handouts as well for this, as well as something that wasn't added on there. There is actually a non-binary symbol, and that's not included in the sample I pulled from. It's again the tip 39. So I added some of that in there. If you do look at the Genogram, just so you know, the symbol for non-binary is a diamond. That's a square kind of turn on its side. Another tool is a narrative assessment tool. This is pretty simple, straightforward. So, and you don't have to be a family therapist in order to provide it. Same with Genograms. So with the narrative assessment tool, it's quite simply broken down into mapping out these two areas. First, mapping out the effect of the substance use or the substance misuse on the family, and then mapping out the effects of the family members on the substance misuse. You see how it comes from two different angles there. Something that's important from narrative that you can work into the assessment tool, but also into all of your treatment, is to externalize the problem. And so what this does means quite simply, or can mean simply, is just thinking about the language you use around the substance use and depersonalizing it. Instead of saying so-and-so's substance use, saying the substance use. What that does is it externalizes it, and it can help over time with some extra efforts to have the family rethink its about the substance use in a sense that that person is not defined by it, but also that they hate the addiction, they love their family member. And when they remember that, everyone can eventually remember that they're really trying to figure out, they're on the same team. They both are fighting against the addiction. They're not fighting against each other. And that can be a powerful way to leverage treatment pieces coming in as you work through, which gets us here to objectives. So now talked about assessment and kind of figuring out what kind of family-centered assessment you want to incorporate into your program. Now we get into actual treatment. So the goal is to leverage the family to influence change. And I mentioned that part with narrative of kind of using the externalizing of the addiction or the substance use as a way to leverage the family to recognize that you're on the same team and that you're going to team together against the addiction as opposed to against each other. Other ways of looking at this of just figuring out goes into next, changing behaviors of family that support misuse. So that connects to the first bullet on here as well. Looking at what may be going on and what may have the unintended consequence of allowing use to continue. And then the last one on here, objectives wise, is in incorporating the family in, it does really bring this to the foreground of how do you prevent or how do you slow down or stop, hopefully, the passing of substance use disorder behaviors across generations. And so it's a lofty goal, but it is an important one of looking at, okay, how do we stop the pattern? How do we stop the cycle? And it's really important. Having family present is going to be a very important part of that. So here, specifically with treatment interventions, I want to focus on addictions counselors. As addictions counselors, you don't have to have family therapy training or family therapy. It's within your scope to be able to do family programming currently as is. And when you look in the TAP 21 from SAMHSA into the addictions counselors competencies, family education is in there. It is an area that is within our scope. So some strategies. First is to meet the family meet them on their terms. Part of this might be assessing stage of change of each of the members. So stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and then relapse is also kind of thrown in there. But thinking about each member and kind of where they're at, which stage each member's at, also possibly thinking about the whole family. If you were to take the whole family into account, where do you think, what stage would this family be? Where would you think they might be? And then proceed accordingly. Based on that, what information, with each stage, we approach things differently. And so based on that, what are we going to do for the family? Of course, facilitate communication amongst the members. And so this is, you're going to potentially be managing some conflict. It can get rocky. One thing we want to watch for in this part here is to make sure we don't become the arbiter of what's right and wrong. So what can happen is either through actions we take or the family elevating us to this point, or both, is that say something's going on and we intervene and say, no, that's not right. That would be a way us as counselors will start to tell them, no, what's happening is right and wrong. Another way is for family members to, something happens and then they all look to you to see what you say as though you're the final word on it. This you want to steer away from because it comes across as taking sides. And that's something we have to try to avoid in family therapy because it's going to backfire. So also adding on to this, educating, because that is the name of the competencies section in the TAP 21 is educating families. So things that we can teach them. We can teach them in general how families work, making sure to keep it general. Don't get very specific with them because that starts to flirt with scope. But you can teach them in general and have the family come up with their own idea based on the information that you've provided. Now, how you can definitely work with them about how recovery works. That is 100% inside the scope. Some of the things you can expand to in talking with families, say, an example would be how early recovery takes a lot of time. And it can be really challenging for family members because you've got this person who's been using substances and they were kind of checked out. Now they've stopped, but they're still feeling like they're kind of not there because they're out all the time, involved in all these meetings and all these other things, these other recovery-based exercises. And working with the family of, yeah, that's normal. With time, that needs to drop off. But in the beginning, that is somewhat to be expected. That could be an example of talking about how recovery works. You also will talk to them about the role in relapse prevention. Essentially, they're really some of the best early warning detectors or early warning sign detectors, though also giving them constructive ways to respond. And then lastly, making sure to connect them to community resources and making sure there's ones for the family too, that it's not just for the patient and the client, that the family also has supports. So examples of supports, again, might be SMART recovery for family and friends, self-management and recovery training for family and friends, Al-Anon, or some other NAMI also offers some services for mental health oriented stuff. Now we're coming to the end here talking about discharge. So as we move to the end of treatment, if it's been family-centered this whole time, the family has been involved in every step, it makes discharge a little easier than, say, if the family hasn't been involved and suddenly you're kind of bringing them on board. Because if the family's been involved the whole time, you don't need to catch them up. Plus, you get some of these other advantages. Hopefully, you've connected the families to the resources, to the community resources while they were in treatment, because this gives you the benefit of being able to help them negotiate their relationship with those community resources. This is a piece that frequently is missed, is that, like, okay, this person is engaged in, say, NA, Narcotics Anonymous. Well, how does that affect the family? Say when their sponsor says, oh, you really have to be careful, your family's sick. Who are they going to listen to? How are they going to work with that? That's one example, but there are many others of what is the family going to incorporate in? How are they going to incorporate this resource in? And what are they going to take in? What are they going to leave out? How are they going to negotiate their relationship with this resource? So we're coming towards the end of this part. We're going to have some questions and answers here shortly. I want to round out here with talking about common challenges that people have in implementing family programming. Because it's rare that I run into people that don't think it's a good idea. It's really common for me to run into programs that have a difficult time actually sustaining a family program. They've got all these great intentions and lofty goals here, and then over time it becomes, it doesn't pan out as well as they'd like. So some things to think about with this. One of the things, the challenges that we can fall into is treating family therapy as secondary. And there's many ways that this comes out, that we treat family therapy as secondary. One is that I mentioned that first phone call of you say, well, no, the patient really needs to call in or the client needs to call in. And yes, we need to say that. And at the same time, how do we say that but not lose the person or give them this message that they're not important? So right off the bat, they can get that impression that they're secondary. Sometimes the families come in even before they call and think that they're secondary. Though through the process, there's confidentiality we have to negotiate. But how do we make sure to honor confidentiality, but make sure the family knows that the family therapy is important? Second is if we think that family therapy is too painful. Now, there could be times when this is family therapy is contraindicated, that it's not a good idea to add it. One example might be if the person is in severe withdrawal, physical withdrawal. Yeah, having in-depth family work, it's not going to go well because they're not in a place to be able to get something constructive or be able to show up in a way that's constructive to that. So you would hold that off. But in that example, the moment that passes, you need to make sure to bring the family in. Because the problem when we give this message that family therapy is too painful, it gives them, oh, okay, we can avoid that. And frequently the most painful thing is the thing that needs the most attention. When we combine 1 and 2, they can really, really trip up a family program. And we need to make sure that we're not doing this sometimes even accidentally, because we can accidentally send this message, hey, here's this thing that we think is too painful, and we don't know if it's all that important. Not that surprising that people aren't going to come in if they come away with that message. So these first two are so vital to making sure to figure out how to not have that coming forward in that way if you really want your family program to thrive. So on here is sometimes also there's a concern of working with folks that are in pre-contemplation, which is interesting because as addictions counselors, we are trained. We know how to do this. We know how to work with folks that are in pre-contemplation. The thing that's complicated here is that we have multiple people in the room. And so it's still the same rules apply of working with that and figuring out how to operate with someone that's in pre-contemplation to figure out if there's a way you can bring them in a meaningful way. So there are ways to work through this. Last one on here is an important one as well, is keeping family secrets. So this is something that is definitely unique to family work, is that you have multiple people that can report on different things, especially if it's a court mandated or they're mandated by some external referent. Because now you have to, how are you going to manage when information comes from significant others or other people other than the patient or client or consumer that is going to, how are you going to work with that? Like, so if they're on probation and a family member discloses that they've relapsed, but the person hasn't admitted to it, how are you going to work with that? But also secrets within the family as well. In other words, common one for me as a couples counselor is someone trying to tell me on my own that they've had an affair and not wanting to share that information. Luckily, I have in my disclosure that I don't keep secrets, that anything shared is out there, and I make sure they know that, and then they automatically have it repeated to them. As an agency, you're going to have to figure out your approach to this, but it is something that's important to think about of how you're going to manage when you receive information that is given to you by someone else, and it might be a secret, but it's something that they're asking you not to share. So as we kind of move on through the day here, we're going to come up to some questions and answers, but I want to talk about next steps. So talked about the full spectrum of family programming. And so it would be important to kind of think about where you're at right now, where your program's at, and what you would like to do, how far on that spectrum you would like to go. And then figuring out that, because then a plan will come forward. Other options might be if you want craft training, there are craft trainers out there. So definitely that can be something that's available. There's also some resources that I provided on the handout. So if you want some connections there, that would also likely lead to potential for craft training. But there's other steps as well. So there are many other evidence-based programs out there that you, as if you're addictions counselor, you can have. Like behavioral couples therapy has been, I believe it started, the first publication of it was in 2015. It's been a growing program. It's an evidence-based practice that you don't actually need to be a couples counselor to do, because it's completely focused on working with a couple through the addiction. And it stays within scope. And there is training in that and it's a very promising practice. But there are others out there. If you work with youth, there's multi-systemic family therapy program, which you would probably need to work for a program that utilizes that. But there's also multidimensional family therapy. There's functional family therapy, all of which have different accessibility levels. Multidimensional might be the most accessible. So figuring out what program you want to use. We here at ATTC, we have a couple of trainings as well. I know I do engaging families, and I'm working on some other training aspects as well around family programming. If you have a specific request, you can contact us as well, because it is something we can potentially work with you on developing. But yeah, so those are some options for next steps. So it looks like it's about 12:45 now. So I'm wondering about some questions and answers. If folks have questions, Jennifer, it looks like you unmuted.
Yes, I was going to read a couple that have come in, and it looks like some more are kind of trickling in. So we'll just go in the order that they're received. So the first one is, do you find that craft is useful after discharge as well?
That is a great question. And I guess it's like, so first answer is yes, if someone has really worked through the craft stuff, they know how to take care of themselves and they know how to use that work. I think the question is more about starting a craft program after. It would be, I don't know if that's, I'm not familiar with that because usually we're doing craft. It's more around motivating them to get into treatment. So the aspects of craft that would be useful are the self-care and figuring out how to, if substance use reemerges, what to do. So I could see an application in that. It's just not generally how I see it applied.
Great, thank you. I am trying to summarize this one. Hopefully I'm understanding it correctly. As counselors, we're taught that family member, when they contact us, the information around the client is not, we're not liable to tell the client that that came in and that it was told to us over the phone. Not sure if I understood that correctly, but
Okay.
I guess seeing if that is something that they're liable to disclose.
No, I mean, the way the confidentiality is for the patient. So anything that the family member brings in is really, and this is one of the ways that I help with, especially with adolescents, is I tell them if I have a parent meeting, they can ask me anything from that parent meeting. I will answer every single thing. I'm not going to withhold, and I let the parents know this, that I'm not going to withhold information from them. Because it's the way that the confidentiality runs, especially if the youth is over 13 in Washington State. I know that might be different depending on other states. But yeah, no, the confidentiality really is for the patient or client.
Great. And it seems like this might kind of build on to that, and hopefully I'm summarizing this as as well as I can. How do you keep client confidentiality and honor their feeling of safety when building therapeutic relationships, while also providing services to the family? Is it better to have separate counselors for the clients?
So there's a couple of parts to that question. So let me answer first, if you don't have separate counselors, because there can be an advantage and a disadvantage to having separate counselors. So as I've done it both ways. And so if I am both, I first have to think, and this is for me as a family therapist, as the family my client, or as the person I'm working with the client. Generally, as an addictions counselor, it's the person that you're working with because it's the way the program is set up. Then the way that I let the person know that I communicate, look, you are the main focus here. And so if anything makes you uncomfortable, I let me know and we will change up. You do have control over the information here as well. At any point you can say no, we're going to stop giving information. I let them know there's some information, they can kind of guide what information. It's a little bit tricky, it gets dicey because then you have to remember what you can communicate and what you can't. And I also will let them know that I will sit and talk with them about, what do I do if they ask me a direct question to that information? How do I handle that? Or how do we handle that is maybe another way I put that. But I'm regular communicating with them about how this is going to work. One of the pieces I'll also note is with the family, depending on what we're doing, I may let them know, look, this is, I'm their counselor first. So there's going to be times I'm going to be advocating for them, as opposed to if I'm just purely a family counselor, then I'm just advocating for the family. So this gets to that second part of whether it's helpful to have a second counselor. It can be, for that fact, you can have separate roles and different focuses, but then you also have to manage how you're going to communicate. I really, as a family therapist, I really need to have a strong working relationship with the other referral, because individual therapy can destabilize relationships. it can be a wrecking ball to relationships. And so I really need to know that that person knows that they're aware of the relationship and taking steps to make sure to protect the relationship, if that makes sense. Long worded answer. Hopefully I got to it, what you were looking for.
Great. Let's see. This one says, can you briefly discuss duty to warn issues, also instances when the client nullifies ROIs for family members after a conflict while in our care?
If they've nullified the ROI, then there's just, you note that, or whatever your agency policy is to write revoked on the ROI or whatever it is. And then you have to be aware of that moving forward, that's happened. Hopefully it's happened at a point that before wise you can communicate with the family member the change, but sometimes it happens where it doesn't, and you basically just say, I'm unable to talk with you at this point. Now I will let folks know that, because even though I can't talk to you, it doesn't mean you can't tell me stuff. I'm going to hear whatever you have to say. And I frequently will do that with parents of like, yeah, let me know. But that doesn't mean I can communicate back. Duty to warn was the other part to this. So, and I'm thinking that you're probably meaning if the client is suicidal or homicidal. And if it's a parent or guardian that's involved, as I'm going to take a guess on this. So in this one, I am definitely reaching out to get consultation on what to do when I can. But if it's immediate risk of harm, I'm contacting authorities, and then I'm also going to contact the parents or the guardians, because my first responsibility is to make sure they're safe. And I'm going to clearly be documenting why I'm doing that. If it's less imminent, I'm going to be working, potentially getting consultation, also documenting, also working with the client or patient to see what, and let them know that it is really important that they have some information here, that they are concerned, and see if there's some way we can facilitate communication.
Great, thank you, Paul. What if parents also use substances?
So yeah, if parents are using substances, it's still important to be able to incorporate this in. It's kind of shifting the framework here of that, remembering that piece there of our goal is to hopefully prevent the substance use disorder from being passed down. So of course, there's the question, do the parents have a substance use disorder of their own? I don't know. There's going to be examples where they do and examples where they don't. Now, if they do, and it's an active addiction, my choice, I may decide whether or not to include the parent in the process. That could be an example where I don't. Because the addiction is too active. It's not where it's going to be really hard to get traction, because the home environment's too chaotic. And so I may fall back and do some more individual type work. That's my own clinical judgment there. I'm really, and something also, I guess, to add on to this is I'm always assessing, is this person useful to the treatment process? If they're not, can I do something to help shift that, to help them be more useful? And if not, then is it going to just be better to kind of not have it, to shrink it down or expand it maybe, and find someone else that would be more useful? So that would be ways to look at that. It may just simply be as well giving psychoeducation to the parents, to let them come to their own decision about what makes sense.
I think we have time for one or two more. And then I have a couple of closing remarks.
Great.
What if there is violence in the home?
Sure. So if there is violence, the simple answer is that if there's ongoing violence, either child abuse or domestic violence or both, unfortunately, that we don't want to move forward with family therapy or family programming. Reason is that because family programming or family interactions can increase conflict, and in doing so, we increase the risk for violence. And so we want to watch out for that. So hopefully you have some screenings or some way to kind of get a sense of whether or not there's violence happening, and then figuring out, okay, if that's happening, then let's do some individual work to try to support that or remedy that.
Right, I'm going to try to reframe this. It seems like this person is having some challenges with sexuality and identity, and clients calling themselves another gender within
Okay.
their family dynamic, and it's causing some issues within their family dynamic, and they're returning back to the center, and I guess they're wondering how to deal with that challenge.
So that's a common and a very challenging, and I'm guessing it sounds like there's some gender identity pieces coming in. And so working with families on this, yeah, it's always, one of the things always making sure, especially if I use whatever the patient or the client uses to identify themselves, and I'll do that in the face of the parent or guardian, even if they're using the other, using the birth gender, but also seeing if the family is able to work, if they're open to this, working through how to do that. I do work with families on this to figure out how they can approach it. Of course, that's with the patient's consent, and we're looking at also watching very closely about how the communication is going, and what effect that is having, or in other words, is the family ready to make this shift? If not, how do I build up resources around this person outside the family so that they can get the supports they need? Because right now their family, their biological family at least, isn't going to be able to do that.
Okay, hopefully this is a quick one. What if family members refuse to come in?
Common. So one of the so you can, of course, give options and see if you can find out why that family member is refusing, what their ambivalence is about coming in, and seeing if you can use some motivational interviewing to see if there's a way to resolve that ambivalence. If you can't resolve that ambivalence, is it just maybe a physical barrier? Can you do a phone call or a Zoom thing to bring them in? And if they won't come in at all, what can be really effective is to have an empty chair in the room that represents that person.
Great. Okay, I think we got through the questions that we received.
Great.
Please remember to fill out the evaluation survey for today's webinar. It'll be in an email that we'll be sending out later today. You'll also see a link to the slides and a recording if you didn't see that in the chat box. And be sure to join us for our next webinar on December 1st. The title of that is still to be determined, but we should have that information up on our website sometime within this week. And thank you so much for your time, Paul. We really appreciate you,
Thank you.
Presenting for us today. And thank you to our participants for taking the time out of their day. And we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, everybody.